Hi everyone. So welcome to the the third pre-dev series. So today we'll be having Brackley together with Katrina taking us through accountability in AI and ideally who's responsible when machines decide. So over to you, Brackley and Katrina.
Yep. Hi guys. Welcome to the talk. So let me just quickly share my screen. Let me know if you can see my screen. Anyone?
No. Oh, yeah, it's coming.
Yep. Sorry. Okay, so I think we can begin. Apologies, we began a bit late. Technical issues, but we begin nevertheless. So once again, welcome to this talk. This is the Responsible AI track. We'll be dealing mostly with responsibility in AI, accountability in AI, and in a title themed "Who's Responsible When Machines Decide?" Right? So it's a feisty title, but at the end of this talk, I think in about 45 minutes, what we aim to communicate and have a conversation about is, who's really should take responsibility and accountability when, machines decide, right, as the title says. But mostly, we tend to look towards who really should take accountability if things go wrong, right? So we will take a look into some of the examples that, have happened in companies and stories that have come up regarding when things went wrong. And we will also take a look at some of the things, the impacts that may have in organizations. So without further ado, we can jump into it. So who are we? This session will mostly be facilitated by myself and Katrina. So I'll let her introduce herself. But to start with, I think it makes sense for me to introduce myself. So my name is Brackley Murunga. I'm a data scientist at Mkopa. I deal mostly with portfolio management. Mostly what that entails is loan forecasting, but then I'm not here to speak more about Mkopa, is more about the conversation at hand. So if I'm not doing data science at Mkopa, on the side, I do consulting, machine learning consulting. I also do build machine learning pipelines for companies. I have over 4 years of experience doing data science and machine learning. I enjoy what I do mostly, and that's why I enjoy participating in conversations like this. And yeah, that's a bit about me. So I'll let Katrina introduce herself and tell us who she is.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katrina Wanjogo Moshemi, and currently I work as a data scientist at BAT. I've been in data science maybe 3 years, professionally a bit less than that. But previously I was an economist, so I would really enjoy such conversations of moving AI ahead while also including conversations on policy, management, and some regulation while still enticing innovation. Yeah.
Right. So Katrina, take it away.
Yeah. So, what does responsibility mean to you? Okay, I think let's start since we don't have the audience, but you can put some comments. When you hear the word responsible, what does it mean to you, and what is something that you're responsible for um, on a day to day? So if you guys put in comments, I'll be able to see them. But let's start with you, Brackley. What are
Yeah.
you responsible for, and what does responsibility mean to you?
Yeah. So for me, if I were to speak on responsibility as in general, I'd say I'm responsible for the things that I'm supposed to do. So that means if I fail to shower, that falls under my responsibilities. I should be able to shower every day. I promise I do. So responsibility really means to me that I have a series of things that I'm supposed to do throughout the day, right? And failure to do those things require me to have accountability and to, again, note down that I haven't done it. But then if it ever comes up, but then mostly I would really say it's being accountable to the things that you are supposed to do. So maybe it differs from you, Kat. Maybe tell us what responsibility means to you.
I guess for me, I think responsibility is when I'm doing a conscious action and I take ownership. So let's say if I make a decision or I make a choice, whether good or bad, it falls on me. So in this aspect, I think with when it comes to responsibility in AI, it could mean a lot of things. But I think that's why we moved a bit away from ethics, because ethics is a very broad spectrum if you want to talk to people about their morality. But responsibility is you do something, you're held accountable because it's on you. You made that decision.
Yep. I think that makes sense. Should we move on to the next?
Y- Yeah, so the issue when it comes into now AI and everything, it's easy to end up in a whodunit situation because you have the machine developer, you have a user, you have stakeholders. There's a lot of moving targets that go into machine learning, AI, any computer science, any developer role that's generally automating or making processes more seamless. There tends to be so many overlaps that it's like who's actually accountable for things. It's like everybody's just pointing at each other. So, and there's a series of events that occur that we shall discuss. So, in the future, code like your mom is watching because she probably is. Yeah, data is everywhere.
Yeah. So you actually should code like your mom is watching. That's probably the only way you'd be responsible enough to do what's not wrong. But just, kind of picking up from that conversation, would like to actually now take a look at cases where things actually went wrong. As I said, responsibility in AI doesn't really come in, the impact of it not really felt when things go right more than when things go wrong, right? So if something happens as a result of a machine deciding a decision that was supposed to be made by a human, and then that thing goes wrong, now that's where responsibility really comes in, and that's where accountability becomes a problem, right? So we have some examples of what really went wrong in some instances. These are very big stories. I think they had a lot of media coverage. So the first one is Air Canada. So imagine a young guy who just lost his grandmother, right? And wants to fly from one point to another. And, going to his airline's page, he meets this shiny new chatbot that has been deployed by the airline that's supposed to help him with the process of booking a flight, right? And this young guy decides to take the chatbot for a ride, asks it a bunch of questions. And one of the questions in which he asks the chatbot is, am I eligible for bereavement discount? Meaning I just lost my grandmother. I'm really sad. Am I really eligible for a discount, right? And the chatbot actually goes ahead and tells the person that they're actually eligible for a discount, only to be found later that that was false information that was given to the young guy, and there is no actual discount that relates to bereavement discounts, right? So the guy goes ahead and pays the full fees, but then comes back to ask for a discount, which the airline disclaims, right? So in a case like that, the airline actually went ahead to pay, was ordered to pay the young man, to give him, I think it was worth $600 worth of damages. I think not really clear, but then that now really starts to speak to the fact that when we have machine learning systems that have been deployed and they're actually making decisions on the customer's end, right? We have financial implications that come with that. We have the image of the company that is at stake. In this case, because it received wide media coverage, there was these stories going around about Air Canada and how, and that I'm thinking should have done some damage into the image. So now that's really to impact the company's well-being in terms of image, in terms of finances, because they spent a lot of money to do the litigation process. They also spent some money, but it would have clearly been gone wrong if this hadn't been identified. The financial impact could have been a bit more. So the second one is relates to buyers, and it's a story about Amazon's recruitment tool that had been deployed to be able to help Amazon do application tracking systems, right? So I think at this point, most of us have applied to companies and received rejections, I think, fairly sooner than we thought we would have, right? So what happens is we have application tracking systems that scan your CV, and they only forward the CVs that the system feels like at the top, maybe 10 applicants, right? So what happened in Amazon's recruitment case, it so happened that the data that was used to train that tool was mostly from male people. So over time, it started to penalize the word female if it appeared into a CV. So now that's speaking to buyers, because what happened is over a period of time, the applicants that were really being let through to recruiters and recruiters managers were men more than women. Of course, now when this story came out, it became a story of bias, became a story of damage being done to Amazon. But that gives you a picture of what could go wrong if something did go wrong. So I'll let Katrina tell us about Facebook and what happened with the Analytica scandal in 2016.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that bias. It's like the gender wage gap is not enough. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, I don't know if some of you are familiar with the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, because this was everywhere. So what Facebook did was it had allowed some student from University of Cambridge to use the data as research. And at the same time, this guy had a company in the US. And then there was just a lot of moving hands, but essentially all this data, they were sending ads, personality test ads, while on top of that, Cambridge Analytica was also taking now companies' information. Now, when these two merged, they ended up now sending personalized ads, as personalized emails, campaign emails for the Trump administration. So further on, this data also ended up in hands of disrupting the EU referendum, and also ended up in the hands of Russians. So it ended up that 50 million people's data collected throughout the 2010s. So this case was happening around 2016. But by 2014, they had said, so they told, Facebook did tell this guy and said, before you join Cambridge Analytica, kindly delete all the data. But did they follow up? No. It's only 2 years later they start now being like, oh, this data wasn't deleted when this thing starts going viral. So in that point, it's like, is it Facebook? Because they did have some policies saying only use this to help customer experience, and they did tell the guy to delete, but who's responsible to ensure that the people who've entrusted Facebook, Meta in this case, that their data would be safe? Is it Facebook's fault because they did have the policy? And who's in charge of ensuring that people's identity could just be thefted like that, and that's it? This is information used for warfare. So it's a very slippery slope when you start looking at responsibility, and why this is one of the reasons why it's so important. And in another use case is Uber's self-driving car incident. So Uber was training its cars. So, and then there was a backup driver. So normally when Uber was starting its training, it said we need to have two drivers. Then they said no, don't have a phone, and it should be okay with one driver. But then now, as this Uber self-driving car, because these guys go for hours, so they've driven, and it's a woman as a backup driver for this self-driving car. Next thing, a late reaction, another woman was hit and killed. So we go to court. These people already have a case of this is not Uber's first time having such a situation. So there's that. But at the same time, also, it's like you are the backup driver. Why did you not offer backup? That's another situation. And also, even looking at the developer, like, why didn't you have a contingency? Because there's also an emergency brake issue that was supposed to be there that they turned off that feature. So when they go to court, this woman pleads guilty for endangerment and gets only 3 years, 3 years supervised probation. But the question is, someone's life was taken. So who will answer to that? Who's supposed to answer to that? So guys, please share in the chat what you think in such incidents, because there are a lot of nuances to a case. You can't just say it's that who done it. To what level should accountability be shared?
Yep. Thank you, Katrina. So just to give you a bit of context, this is where artificial intelligence is headed in Africa. And the reason to justify the reason why we're having these talks and conversations like this early is when you look at the projections, especially from 2020 all the way to 2030, the field of AI, and especially in terms of quantification in the investment, is going up exponentially, right? So when you look at from, I think, 2022 and what is projected, this data is from, I think, Gartner, if I'm not wrong. So when you look at the projected numbers, it's only bound to rise, right? And the fields like AI, robotics, machine learning, which is one of the biggest use cases of AI in Africa in most organizations. When you look at autonomous and sensor technology and the ubiquitous natural language processing, which is behind tools like ChatGPT and Google's Gemini, um, these are things that are progressing is not only in usage but also in deployment, right? So that begs the question that we should really try to have these conversations earlier than later, because again, as they say, the what's that they say? The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now, right? So if we don't have these conversations now, then what we're doing is we're postponing them. And when they happen, they start to bring cases like the ones we've just seen, the Uber incident that caused death. We have financial implications for organizations. We have bias and things like when things like this happen, they tend to speak directly to innovation in the sense that they stifle innovation. So if one company says that, my competitor has been penalized for example, using AI in this way, what is to make that company shy away from deploying the same technology? Because if people now stop using these technologies as much as they're supposed to, then the field stops to grow. And we've all seen the impact that AI and machine learning has on our in our generation, especially with the case of ChatGPT, because I can't say I haven't used it more than I wish to admit. Right.
I've used it
So
today.
I have probably in preparing this talk, I have. Yeah. So we'll move on swiftly to the importance of responsible AI. So Kat, please take it away.
Okay, so the importance of responsible AI, essentially what we're asking here is it's still a say baby industry in Africa, but why should we bother having guardrails and stopping these things? Sorry, it's stopping these things while we're still growing. So one thing I would say is first, trust and adoption. With, let's say, with importation growth and becoming a global village, when we import things, when you see KEBS and you see KRA, there's at least a level of trust to something that you'll be like, okay, you know what? At least there's some vetting that has been done. So you'll be more likely to take on something. Because if you're looking at large MNCs, we're looking at big companies that are run by boomers or people who are not very risk averse, you really need to create a place whereby someone can feel safe and like there's a guardrail, like things, because things can just go off. So this would help in terms of the speed of acceptance, the wideness of acceptance, and also in the future. So this goes into ethical standards. So with ethical standards is, let's say, human rights. Human rights is something that we have to think about because as we keep growing in AI, the fragile side of our humanity will show and will be exposed in such ways you wouldn't even believe. So right now we have to start saying, what's the point of all this? And before that, how can we ensure that these things are human led, human contained? We all know there's a takeover that might come because if the Simpson have shown it, it might just happen.
Yeah.
And we go into innovation and sustainability because there's always that conversation of, if we do have regulations and if we do try stop, won't we stop the innovation? Won't we kill something that's just growing? But it's totally the opposite. Because if we keep going without having these conversations and understanding what responsible AI should be, we'll end up moving back and starting again to add all these things. Oh, it's like right now with climate change. 20 years ago, they didn't plant the trees except for our lady Wangari Maathai. Shout out to her. But yes, now everyone's like, oh, you guys need to stop doing this. You need to stop using plastic. But the damage is already ongoing. Not that we can't reverse, but it was easier then. As a prevention is better than cure.
Yep. So I think another point that needs to be addressed is in terms of compliance and regulation. Now, I need to make this distinction very clear. What this talk and the conversation around this talk is about is not that we have regulation for something that we don't really understand the impacts of yet, which is the AI sector. I think if any of you have paid attention in the last year, there have been talks by the government to introduce, I think, a robotics bill. I think that is the wrong, personally, I think that is the wrong way to go about it, because introducing something into law for something that we barely understand the impacts of is not really what we are about. What we are advocating for is, let's collectively come together and determine a responsible and accountability framework so that as we continue to innovate, we have clear and set rules on how we would handle cases if they happened to the point where a decision was made by a system and that decision led to something that we didn't really anticipate. So when we speak to compliance and regulation is twofold. Number one, meaning we are bringing to light the fact that the more we think about this situation up front before the industry actually starts taking off, the more it would create a better ground to be able to have, because regulatory societies stand by our side. Because if we don't think about them, then it will be a case of, you see, the AI field is doing 1, 2, 3 things that we don't like, so we are just going to regulate the, out of it, and we stifle innovation. Because again, companies are usually in compliance. They think about compliance. The first thing you talk to a company about, they're usually compliant first, and then see how they can build innovation on top of that, right? So which makes sense, because a case for compliance should be made for every company, because they don't want to be slapped with fines, they don't want to be slapped with things similar. So thinking about compliance and regulation is an important from a perspective of, let's think about it and build the framework, not to stifle innovation itself, but to kind of grow the innovation alongside the framework that exists. So that again speaks into risk mitigation, because if we start thinking about this earlier, then it will be easier to kind of handle those cases when they come. Because again, AI is experimental. We don't know what it's going to do. We have had situations where you have talked to ChatGPT and you start wondering whether it's going to take your job. It's amazing in that way. There are much more amazing things to come, I know. So the more we start thinking about these situations, especially in regards to accountability, it becomes easier to kind of have those conversations when things go wrong. And the last one is enhanced decision making. So to that point, I'd say, um, you know, long time ago, it used to be easier to be accountable for something, because if you are purchasing even a single pen in an organization, there's somebody who signed off on that pen. So if things went wrong and it happens that something was not procured right, you can always go back to the person who signed on it. But then, as Katrina correctly pointed out, if a self-driving car knocked somebody down, who are you going to blame? Are you going to blame the developer? Because a case could be made that a developer is the one who didn't put XYZ into his code, into building this system. That's why it happened. Do you blame the person who flagged it off? Because we didn't know these things are going to happen. So the more we start having this conversation, it becomes easier to kind of make decisions in a way that is more robust, because we have a framework that is kind of guiding that conversation.
Wait, before
So
you move on, I want to put you on
yes,
the spot. You
yes, go
talked
ahead.
about the robotics bill and compliance and regulation, and I think
Yeah.
you've had a bit of time in the field. So, what's one guardrail that you think would be of importance right now with the growth in ML?
Um, so I think from my perspective, it would be it's twofold. There are guardrails in terms of technology. I think a better one that I'd give is um, development by companies like Meta that have put out, I think there's something called Llama Guardrail. So there are
Yeah.
frameworks that have been put in place technically to be able to kind of check the actual developments that are taking place. So things like you find Meta putting out a large language model, and then alongside that, they put out a framework to kind of fact check and to control, to have a guardrail for that model. I think that's one of the things that could contribute. I think the next best thing would be guardrails in terms of compliant regulation, but that is what now I don't really advocate for. The guardrails that I'm really speaking about is those that kind of are packaged within those technological advancements that come with it. So that's a bit about how I'd go about it.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, this is an open conversation. I'm bummed out that we don't have an audience that we can, put them on the spot. But
Yeah.
but
But I
please
can
put
see
your comments in
Mina
the
is
chat.
out here telling us a few things.
Yeah. So if we can read some of them, I think we'll get to a Q&A section where we can get some of those comments and address them.
Yeah.
So yeah, on to the next slide. So what this again is a classical case of who done it, right? So who is to blame if something happens? So we know the machine is the robot that executed the action. Should we blame the robot? Should we, uh, And funny thing is, an AI actually generated this picture. So if it were to generate something that is of, you know, not what I wanted, what would I have done? I'm the one who prompted it, but it's the one who generated. So is it my prompt that's wrong? Is it that AI that didn't understand? Is it the developer that made the whole thing? So it's a whole classical case. And we usually end up in this case where we don't have a very good accountability framework and a very good responsibility framework that can, lay down some of the guidelines to be able to take care of things like this. Katrina, I don't know if you have anything to say about this nice picture
So
that no.
Mina gave an answer. in
Mm-hmm.
terms of who should be responsible. He or she says, I feel like AI and the company are to be blamed. AI
Mm-hmm.
because it's a system that was flawed, and also the company, as they didn't provide clear information about its precautions and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now the AI surely it's just simulating consciousness. It's just there. It's just catching us stray.
Yeah, I think a, a question to think about is if we as the company were to give a disclaimer that this robot can make mistakes, does it justify the mistake when the robot actually makes the mistake? Right?
I mean, that's
I
what
think that's
ChatGPT does.
exactly. So the fact that they write there ChatGPT can make mistakes,
Yeah.
does it make it easier on you and your consciousness that when it actually makes mistakes, you which I would think fits into the responsibility and accountability, but that's just a
Mm.
food for thought, right? People might have different answers to that.
We gotta start reading terms and conditions.
Definitely, yeah. So I'm not sure how we're going to run this in terms of Q&A. I'd really hoped to, it's an interesting topic of conversation. So I'd really hoped to have a conversation around it. I don't know if we're going to have to read some of these comments and then respond to them, probably put your questions in the chat because we do have some 15 minutes, so to speak, of engagement.
So Alice says, I think the company should be blamed.
Mm. I mean, I think so too, because they should be punished for their innovation, you know. They probably should.
Oh, you use those words. Punished for their innovation. Hey.
uh, yeah, okay, it was sarcastic, a very sarcastic statement, but yeah, I think. What do you think? If the company is the one to be punished, the implications, of course, are there. But what do you think?
Oh, definitely the company as well.
Mm,
Because as I had raised earlier, these issues don't start and end. They start from executive level, goes down to management, goes down to the technical, goes
mm,
down to even how the database is stored,
mm.
goes into now, let's say, even the Uber car in itself. Enough checks should be used. They should have tracks where they run these things, where they can simulate holograms and test. If they really want innovation, don't use people.
Yeah. So I also think mostly because the company is involved with the end-to-end development of the tool, they definitely should take accountability for that. I think accountability is in general, whether it's to be applied within the company in terms of we're going granular. We're saying, is it the product manager? Is it the software developer? I would say all of them because they're involved in
Everyone.
the life cycle. And
Mm,
I think the more we have these conversations and the more they know that they should be accountable for it, then it will be conscious of them that every time they do something, they think of the potential impacts of that thing beforehand. And I don't think that stifles innovation. It just makes you kind of conscious of what would happen and probably do something about it. Because remember, we are going to a world where um, machine learning systems are going to be ubiquitous. They'll probably decide whether or not you get a loan, whether or not your insurance claim for something that might be catastrophic is valid. They're going to decide so many things, right? And in a scenario where something bad has happened in terms of you got an accident, your car was, in additional to the emotional trauma that you've gone through, and AI rejects your application for insurance, now that becomes a different story. So there should be these conversations up front so that we think about them when we develop this system so that it's a bit easier. Because again, an implicit action for that might be we end up creating better systems because we thought about the impact, not just rushing to deploy these innovations
mm,
without forethought.
for sure.
Yep. I think if we don't have
Do we
any
have
other question.
questions?
Oh, we do.
We
Do
have,
we? Okay.
yes.
Please, please,
So
please. Go ahead. I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm sharing my screen, so I'm afraid to show my private browsing stuff in terms of the documents that I
So,
used to generate this doc.
oh wow. So Ali said, after she said, I think the company should be blamed, she added on, sorry if I misgender you. After continuous errors, if they don't take measures to prevent further mistakes.
Mhm.
That's true. Then mine has a question. How do
Yep.
we mitigate deepfakes? And then before you respond,
Mm.
this guy, Carrington Kinyanjui said, there is a mech interp problem here. In typical engineering, a given bridge has a structural integrity and is meant to be operated in given bounds. Do we understand enough to know LLM bounds? I feel like those two might go together,
Mm.
such as their Gen AI.
Mm. Um, so to your question, I think I'll start with the last question. It's interesting, not to say that your question is not interesting, Mina, sorry, but Carrington's question really speaks to the so there's this company called Anthropic, which is
Mm,
a competitor to so to speak, competitor to OpenAI.
OpenAI.
So what they do is they base their research mostly on ethical and responsible. They tend to base their products from a responsible side. So in speaking to the bounds of an LLM, we don't quite understand how they work, right? We know that if we give them enough data and they crunch on it, and the more data they have, the better they become at doing things. It becomes a conversation of, okay, we know what they can do, but just we just don't know how they can do it. So in regards to bounds, we haven't really gotten to a point where we say we fully understand the bounds of this LM. And I think that should be scary to people. Okay, I don't mean to scare you, but it should be something that we think about so that at the point where we deploy this LLMs in an application of a chatbot that is speaking to somebody who is suicidal, for example, that is speaking to a person who has mental issues, we really have to think about the implications of that because we haven't really understood the bounds, right? So that's my take on that. There are a couple of papers that have been put out. I'm sure if you Google, you find them. Google does a very good job of putting out papers like that. I think there's some paper if you're interested. It's called patch scopes. It tries to understand the paths that the LLM takes to be able to make a decision. You'd probably benefit from that. It's a high level read. You can be able to understand what they're doing. And there are a couple of papers that try to understand the bounds of this LLM. So it becomes it's a continuous research field, so to speak. So we are constantly making ways to it. I'll let you answer the second question, the first question, Katrina, the
Yeah,
minus
just
question.
oh, okay. So I wanted to even add on the bounds for LLM. I think even with things such as knowledge graphs, used in the building of RAG, implementing that in terms of maybe removing the black box that would happen with NNs and all that, creating that transparency. We can audit, even as we should. The way you audit finances is how we should be auditing
Yeah.
data solutions. You go test edge cases, try see, things even in the constitution. How does it play towards that? Things in the Human Rights Act, how does it play towards that? In order to ensure we're working within the bounds of also creating a safe future for people. Not just if you're in a machine heavy area, you're the one in power, because we've already lived that life. So
Yep.
hopefully AI can take us to a different, viewpoint. Hey, how can
Yep.
we mitigate viewpoints? I think for me, one thing I would say is one thing, in that thing where of the KEBS and KRA stamp when you have a solution,
Mm.
in terms of risk levels of solutions, with now a statute, a regulatory party that can tell you, so you go, you take inventory of your solution, then you'll know whether you're high risk, moderate risk, or low risk. So high risk is where there'd be a lot of paperwork and maybe take a lot more time because it could potentially harm people, or potentially, cause war, or
Mm.
moderate, whereby, let's say, generating using deepfakes, like let's say in TV shows, I think, or even on your websites, you say this is generated and this is this, and also maybe ensuring that these companies have to use a trademark. Like you have to have a signaling party that ensures that a deepfake versus reality can be differentiated by, whether it's a word or a letter or a trait that we put into all deepfakes. Because, in the end, it's always fun when you're in power until you're the one suffering. Then you're like, oh, yeah, that could have been a simple thing. What do you
Mm.
think?
I think for it's definitely an interesting problem. So it becomes a circular problem where we are trying to every single day these models become better at generating the thing that
Mm,
we want to look out for. So it generates the thing, and then we want to use the same thing to kind of capture the deepfakes. But then we are constantly making improvements to this model to generate better and better deepfakes.
mm.
So I don't think we'd ever reach. Okay, I don't want to be a prophet of doom, but I think it definitely calls for scrutiny, and it starts with every single one of us. So whether we decide to believe that it's a developer problem, it's a company problem, initiative I think starts from us because we are getting to a place where they're becoming so good at generating content. It's it's really hard to it, and I think it will it get to a place where it will be really hard to identify them. So if you're asking for a solution, I don't really have one yet. I think we the more we have these conversations, it's better to kind of have that from a human perspective to fact check the things that are being put online, and then from there I think it can be it can start it can spin off something that can lead us to a solution. I don't know. That's my take on it.
Mana says it's a
Yep.
chicken and the egg problem.
It's definitely chicken and the egg. This,
So
yeah.
the question is
Mm,
from Eugene. If
yeah.
AI reaches a point where it surpasses human intelligence, what
Mm.
safeguards can be put in place to ensure it remains under human control and operates in the best interests of humanity? Hey, ChatGPT 5.0 is coming. It's coming to you shortly. It's not far. It's
Yeah,
not far at
it
all.
is.
It's
They've
just
been
in the
quiet.
lab, chilling.
They've been they've been quiet for a while. I know that if they come out,
Yeah,
they probably
they
come out
say
with a bang.
way, way significantly more intelligent than a PhD.
Yeah.
So,
Um,
wengine, what do you think?
I
They took.
have an interesting concept, a rather controversial one. I think from my perspective, I don't think it's a threat. Okay, so let me qualify the statement. Most of the times when you look at people who have tried to take over the world and um, have tried to do mass damage, so to speak, these have not been the smartest people in the room, right? When you look at Hitler, I'm sure there was somebody who was much more smarter than Hitler when Hitler was Hitler, you know, and they didn't try to take over the world. So my controversial perspective is, are we really concerned when we have something that is more quote unquote smarter than us? And the bounds of smarter varies from person to person. People might think, you know, when I have an accumulated amount of knowledge, then that, of course, that makes me smarter. When you look at the use case that was given, I think, some time back, where we had a model that outperformed, I think, a couple of PhDs in a specific area in answering the questions. Is it a question
Mm.
of it just had an aggregated amount of knowledge that was a lot more than each individual one of them? Or is it a question of it's actually generally smarter? I would think, does it we definitely need to worry about that, but then I would think it won't reach a point where they're trying to enslave human beings. Given
Mm.
my perspective of, I
Famous
don't think a
last
smart
words.
person would want, you know, it might come, they'll probably, I don't, okay, let me not. say too much because it might come. They'll show me a clip one day after 50 years, after people have
Yeah.
been enslaved. Like, remember you said this. So it's,
But I also
yeah,
think to answer this question, we have to think about. I think one of the conversations I was having was when with AGI, what
mm,
makes a human?
yeah,
Because in order for humans to be of value, then machines
yeah,
cannot replace humans.
mm, yeah,
So because AGI will simulate consciousness, it can do everything you want to do. Maybe
yeah,
they'll even make it eat, drink water, shower, but at the same breath, there's also some foolishness and randomness and chaos that comes with being a person.
yeah,
That's something that's so bright and so continuous, but something that can also learn patterns. Yes,
mm,
Carrington. This is a fundamental unsolved problem. It's the
yeah,
alignment problem.
yeah. And plus, you know the thing that you're really worried about is we are still in a place where it cannot be able to differentiate a cat from guacamole. I don't know if you guys have seen the it's a it's a field of research. It's called I forget what it's called, but basically it involves fooling machine learning system into kind of thinking it's something else. So what they do is they have a machine learning system that has been trained on images of cats and dogs, and then what they do is you want to learn how much augmentation do you need to make on a cat's image to make it say that it's a dog? And now somebody went ahead and further asked the question, how much noise can I add to this image to kind of fool this model into thinking this cat is guacamole? And it's again a fundamental problem of
Mm.
research. You'd be surprised on how short of a time it takes to fool a model like that. So again, we are still far off, but we are advocates for having these conversations early, as we said. So
And funny enough, they used
yeah.
I'm seeing it here. They used Google Inception V3. That's the
Mm,
one that they fooled.
yeah. So I think it's good that we're having these conversations early, so it's a bit better. So I don't know if you have any questions, any other more questions, Katrina.
Oh,
If we don't, I think we
Carrington
might
says
be
it's
out of time.
adversarial training. Okay,
Adversarial
but
training,
I
yes,
think
yes, yes,
mm, I think for me
definitely.
the last thing I would say, the lowest bar when it comes to responsibility is regulation. So that should be the
Mm,
lowest bar,
mm,
whereby if you fall from that, you get punished by the law.
mm,
But you should be better than that. I beg.
yeah. We are smart people. We can build systems
Mm.
that don't have to take, oh, and
Over.
I'm talking as an audience member. I'm sure they are very smart people. They've asked very smart questions. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's it from our end, guys. Thank you so much for attending this. Again, we are more than happy to have conversations outside this. As I said, we both do different things outside of our own primary field of work. We have different interests. Myself, I like to consider myself a self-made researcher, looking into things like this. So if you do have something that might involve conversations around machine learning pipelines, developing systems ethically, responsibly, reach out to me, reach out to Katrina, have these conversations. We'll be more than happy to have. That is what would count as my parting shots. So
Yeah.
um
Thank you, everyone. And yes, Mina, people did sell their selves. Celebrities
yes,
sold themselves to become AI models. But
yes.
if it ain't about the money,
uh,
All right.
Eugene? Oh.
Right, amazing. Thank you so much, Brackley, together with Katrina, on the amazing session. I believe it has been very interactive, and our attendees have learned something. Definitely encouraging everyone to ensure they follow Brackley and Katrina, on the online, LinkedIn, get to, continue with the conversations on their different platforms. So, heading over to our next session, I think this will be by Hassan Bahati around automating language translation. So, Hassan is a computer scientist and also a GDG organizer. So, over to you, Hassan.
Hi Sabrina, can you hear me and perhaps see me?
Yes, you are audible and we can see you.
Oh, amazing. All right. I'm really excited and happy to be here. I'll just go ahead and start sharing my screen. Please let me know when you're able to see my screen. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, right now it's loading. Yes, we can now see your screen.
All right. I guess we can get started. Hello, everyone watching, everyone streaming. My name is Hassan Bahati. I am a computer scientist. I'm really fascinated about systems architecture, and I also do quite a lot of open source and lately writing and building up a couple of things, a couple of packages and tooling around Firebase. Yeah, it's quite exciting. But today we're here, and I was really honored that today we are going to be talking about automating language translation with Firebase Genkit, Gemma, and Olama. And if you're maybe wondering why Firebase Genkit, why Gemma, why Olama, I guess those are questions we are to answer today. All right, I guess we can dive in. So, reading that title for today, I'm talking about language translation. I was earlier on reading a blog on BBC, and this was stating that over 7,000 different languages are spoken around the world. So, if there are 7,000 languages, it's really mind blowing. Yeah. And to me, when I think about 7,000 languages being spoken across the world, and I'm just one person, it might be a bit hard for me to go ahead and learn all the 7,000 languages. So what does this pose to me as an individual? What it poses to me is that there is a language gap. And, as perhaps any person that's maybe traveling around the world, if you may be having to travel for whatever reason, for school, graduate school or business, and you're finding yourself in different countries, different languages being spoken, that means you're probably facing the language gap. Facing a language gap means you're basically having a barrier to communication at a point in time, probably due to being in a different country or being in a different location. So what that really means is that if you've been in a position where you don't know the language of the language spoken by the people where you are at, that means you need a way, or you need to figure something so that you can have real-time conversations with the people. What this looks like is that even just moving from one place to another, asking someone for help at a certain point, you surely would need a way to have those real-time conversations with a person, and that basically creates a barrier in that case. So, thinking about AI, artificial intelligence, and, what role it can play in this, looking at so many languages around the world being spoken, thinking about learning all of them, well, you could place a bet on that. I'm not sure if I'm ready to learn 7,000 languages and maybe be fluent at all of them. But maybe what would be exciting is that AI could play some role. Maybe AI could support you in a way. So, thinking about the modern tooling, thinking about the modern developments around large language models, these have actually been trained on very big and large data sets, and this is giving them the capacity and the ability to be able to process languages, and that means we can actually be able to maybe provide our text in a certain language that we do understand and get that text's meaning in a different language. So in that way, I feel that I'm closer to the other side, because thinking about what communication, or what communication basically comes down to, I feel communication comes down to someone understanding what you are communicating to them. So what that would look like is that if a person is actually not conceptualizing or even understanding what you're saying, you're probably not communicating to them. So that basically gets us back to the initial question we did ask ourselves: can AI truly break that language gap? Well, as we move on, maybe you will see the answer, maybe I will, but probably we both will be able to say that. So, yeah, the tech stack we're going to basically we're basically going to leverage today is around these three. One of them being Firebase GenKit. Why am I super excited about Firebase GenKit? I feel it's an amazing product by Google, and the Firebase team at Google, and it's a framework for building AI applications. And one reason why I really love Firebase GenKit is because it enables you perform RAG. Oftentimes people are going to refer to RAG as retrieval augmented generation, and if you may be thinking about building an application whereby it might want to leverage a knowledge base that is of your own, or maybe you have a particular data set that you want to refer your responses from, Firebase GenKit actually bridges that gap as well. That you might not be leveraging a large language model like Gemini and not having custom responses, or maybe pulling these responses from data that you do own. With Firebase GenKit, you can actually achieve that. But with Firebase GenKit alone, we would as well want to leverage an open source model. For example, Gemma, currently there is Gemma 1, Gemma 2, and these are state-of-the-art language models, specifically built for translation. And they are built by Google, and they are publicly available. But if they are publicly available, that means we need to figure where to find them. And thinking about where to find these, Olama is one of those places that if you get that Olama gives you this repository, and it being a powerful tool where you can basically manage, pull language models, get to use them, pull them to your machine locally and be able to run them locally. And it offers a variety of large language models that you can actually leverage. And the other beauty around the models available on Olama is that you can actually specify what variant you might want to work with. Maybe you want to work with one that's a bit smaller or one that's really explicit. You can actually have that flexibility to go ahead and manage all that. Right. So Olama still provides you that flexibility in model management without the need for a cloud infrastructure. So if you've been thinking about probably working with models locally on your machine, or maybe you've been wondering, how can I get a large language model onto my machine, and maybe you work with it without internet, probably you're moving to a place that has low bandwidth, or you're basically expecting that you won't have internet at certain points. Maybe you might want to make use of large language models like Gemma and access them via Olama. So moving forward, we are basically going to look at setting up Olama, and we shall get to this towards the end. But in that, we are basically going to explore where do we even get to access Olama. If you may be hearing about this for the first time, what is it even? How do I get to browse it? How do I get to pull the models? How do I get to run the models? How do I even get to interact with them? These are all the questions that we are looking to answer today. These are all the questions that we probably want to have ourselves acquainted with. Um, okay, we'll just get to that towards the end when we are diving into the technical bit. But besides setting up Olama, we shall also need to verify that it's running. For Mac OS or any other distribution you might have, any other operating system you might have, it's as well available, and there are different ways you can actually go ahead and verify that it's running, or maybe try to troubleshoot if it's not running. But really high chances that you won't get it wrong at setting it up. Okay, so thinking about all this, trying to put it together, what would be the use of Gemma models? Gemma models are basically built by Google, and thinking about where could someone actually use these, the common use cases could be customer support. That's one of those points where you actually, even just beyond customer support, it could even be technical support for maybe a tool. That's maybe a section I'm really conversant about. But if you may be building an application and perhaps have a user that's having a challenge, maybe accessing something or having a problem with a certain feature, and they probably opened a ticket, but they probably don't speak the language that you speak, or probably you speak the language they don't speak. So how do you go about that? And maybe they're actually opening up a ticket in their language. On your end, how do you go about that? So I think such kind of support, such kind of technical support, such kind of customer support is something can be that can be achieved using Gemma models, and basically be able to get these real-time multilingual chatbots that can help businesses cater for global customers and perhaps scale to any part of the world. But it may not just be about supporting people. Even before getting to support the people or the users, that means they've actually interacted with something. So if they've interacted with something, that means you might have some content somewhere, but then why would you have to stretch your users to actually require the support if you can convert that early enough? So that's where Gemma models can as well come in, that you can be able to localized content, from websites to blogs to documents for various audiences. A couple of languages are supported by Gemma models, and you can basically try to plug into those, and perhaps if it's a website, maybe pick up their location and perhaps try to translate your language into the language that is spoken in that country. Or even you might want to give your users more flexibility so that they go ahead and maybe select the language in which they want to view your content, or in whatever language they want to be able to access your website or your blog or any other document you might be offering online. But beyond content, beyond support, you could be building an e-commerce platform, and you want your users to be able to see the product descriptions, to see the reviews, to give them confidence about your different, to give them confidence about your different products, and probably to also receive customer feedback across different regions. You would basically want to have some kind of translation around that. You could want to take it beyond product descriptions, but that's one use case. But then healthcare, legal, these are other sectors that we can't basically look down on. And you can as well be able to translate documents. You can be able to translate medical records. You can be able to translate contracts, so that the actual person, so that the people that are involved in that agreement get to fully understand what they are maybe agreeing to in the language they best know, so that they are not they are not in a position of having agreed to something because they did not fully understand it because it was in a different language. Right. So those are some of the real world applications. You might want to call them use cases for Gemma, customer support, content localization. You can have use cases in e-commerce beyond what try to list out here. You can have use cases in healthcare. You can have use cases in the legal sector. So, you know, prior to starting and getting into these real world scenarios, trying to explore how many languages are spoken across the world and so all the detail that we just looked at, it's also necessary to understand what GenKit is. And you might not want to just say GenKit because it's Firebase GenKit. So that also gets you thinking, what is Firebase? What is GenKit? Because we are basically going to explore how Firebase GenKit as a framework enables us to achieve so much of this. So basically what that looks like is that Firebase GenKit is where we are going to do most of the work. So if Firebase GenKit is the tool, that means we really need to understand it to some extent. And as earlier said, it's a tool. Basically, you're looking at building an AI-powered application. It's a framework you might want to leverage. It's built by the Firebase team at Google, and Firebase is a suite of so many tools and so many products that you can be able to use in the development, in that you can be able to use in the development, that you can be able to use to distribute your application, that you can be able to use to test, that you can be able to to view the analytics and so much more. Firebase is a suite of so many tools, and it's not just limited to the tools that we've seen, the Firebase tools that we've seen every day. Right now it also does have the AI capabilities. And if Firebase's goal is to enable you build the next generation mobile apps and the next generation web applications, you might not want to skip thinking about making your application AI powered or giving it AI capabilities. So we shall as well look into that in detail moving forward, how we are basically going to set up Firebase GenKit and how does it get to, and also just can I say a walkthrough of what it entails and how we can be able to have it work for our use case. Yeah, we shall as well have to run Firebase GenKit because that's a framework that shall be using. And beyond running it, we shall also have to explore the GenKit UI, what it can actually do and what we can actually achieve with it, how we can be able to toggle models, maybe switch from one to another, how we can actually set up flows and be able to do so many things. So yeah, also not just limited to the interactions. We can also have an API and data pipelines for the language translation and anything else you might want to do. So if you're wondering how do I now maybe serve the application across from Firebase GenKit to maybe a front end somewhere or your mobile app somewhere, you can as well have an API availed to you by Firebase GenKit. Right. So we shall as well get to look into this a bit deeper, at a deeper level moving forward, as we get to explore how we're actually going to set up and run Firebase GenKit. But then, when we're starting today, we talked about automating language translation with Firebase GenKit, using Olama, Gemma, and Firebase GenKit with Olama and Gemma. That means at some point in time, all this has to come together. So if all this is coming together, that means we have to find a common ground where they all do come together. We are going to we are going to we're going to notice that in Fabric GenKit, that's where we're basically going to do all the application management, choosing and specifying what model we want to use or interact with. And also we shall have to set up Olama locally on our machine. Setting up Olama locally on our machine means that we can now be able to pull any model that we want to interact with Could be Gemma, could be Gemma 2, or any other that you might want for any task that you might want. Today's task for us will be language translation. And integrating, maybe you could also want to think about an example, just like try to put across one of them here, that Firebase Kit will be able to query Gemma and the Gemma model through Olama and translating the user input or documents in real time. So that's basically what will be happening in the background. That get to Firebase Kit, query Firebase Kit to interact with Firebase Kit to query the Gemma model. And where is Gemma model? It's being managed by Olama, and that's how we can be able to retrieve whatever 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 translations from users' input that we might want to do. So you might have noticed we are talking about doing so many things locally. Firebase Kit gives you that flexibility. But by default, Firebase Kit as well enables you to use models online. We shall as well get to look into that if time allows. Okay, so thinking about what the challenges of language translation could be. Some of these could range from model accuracy, just like we've seen in recent times that at times, and the disclaimers that are usually put at when interacting with most of these large language models, disclaimers around accuracy, being told that this large language model can actually make mistakes. So that is one challenge that you could look at here, that maybe you wanted to say a certain maybe word in a different language, but then the model makes a mistake, and I can't imagine what that feels like, but that's one of the challenges that it might be a bit inaccurate to some extent. Then, thinking about the computational resources, it's really resource intensive. Even just setting up these models locally, you might, if you don't really trust your machine resources, you might want to maybe find a workaround that as well. So that is one of the challenges that you might face working with most of these large language models locally. That it might even just pulling the models to your machine might take a bit of a while. Models being as heavy as 5 GB or even more, that poses a lot of resources required for you to be able to have that working out. Then the other could be customization, that some use cases might require fine-tuning models on domain-specific data. Yeah, that's one of the challenges. To some extent, Firebase Kit gives you the leverage to provide a knowledge base and work around that. But if you probably want the model itself to be fully customized, you might want to perhaps do some fine-tuning, do some training, which might be quite costly in the long run. But it's not just about the challenges. There are as well benefits, and there are as well pros that we can attach to our using AI for language translation. These ranging from real-time translations and being able to get an immediate result while the model is running locally. And this basically gives you so much leverage that you can get most of these things in real time even when you're not connected to the internet. So this, for a person that's in a country or in a location that does have unstable internet, or probably does have low bandwidth or something of that kind, you can as well leverage these and have a real-time translation. Then flexibility, it's super flexible. You can plug in any model you want. into Firebase GenKit. There are a couple of packages to support you with Olama, or even if you want to use Gemini, or if you want to use any other. But if you're looking to use the local models, you might want to use Olama. There's really great support around that to basically enable you run the AI models locally and have without having to depend on cloud-based APIs. Then scalability as well. Firebase GenKit allows you to scale the AI applications and grow with your app. And there is also really a lot of support via deploying your application as functions, to a couple of Google services. So there's so much and so many ways and so many benefits of getting to plug into Firebase GenKit, plugging into Olama, plugging into Gemma, to achieve language translation. Right. I guess we can now try to look into the future and try to think about what does it look like, what's next for building these AI powered apps, what's next for AI powered translation, what does the future look like. Thinking about what's next for AI translation in the coming years, it's really exciting that there will be really, really improved model accuracy. This coming from a lot of dialects being added, a lot of people contributing to this across the world. And, all this support basically every day, every minute is contributing to the accuracy that yesterday, if a certain language wasn't available, you you won't be so sure that it won't be available next month. There's that continuous development, there's that continuous improvement, which gives really so much hope and excitement that the accuracy is to get better. Then thinking about the real-time multilingual communication, basically here we are looking at live translations in meetings. What if, as I'm speaking right here, on your side you're basically hearing my voice in a different language? I mean, that's really exciting. And having large language models help us do that, I guess, would be super amazing. And if you can as well, go ahead and achieve this locally, giving you so much flexibility to also get a feel of building AI powered apps. I mean, there's so much, so much that you can as well achieve out of that. Then greater accessibility that AI powered translation can make, can in a way transform education, healthcare, legal services to be more accessible globally. For example, if I maybe wanted to use a certain service that's maybe available in a different country and all the legal documents are written in the language that's available in that country, that shouldn't be a limitation for me to go ahead and pick up that tool, pick up that service, and get to use it. So AI for translation at this point gives us hope that it's basically going to be that easy for you to plug in and have most of that accessible to you and work with it. So greater accessibility, real-time multilingual communication, improved model accuracy are a few of the many exciting things for what's next for AI translation. Okay, thank you for this part. So at this point, I'll just request to unshare the slides at least, and perhaps we could now get to look at the other side of the presentation. Basically, getting to look at how are we going to go about, all the setup and all the things that we've been talking about. Where do you actually get to find them? How do you get all this coming together? So on this other side, I do have a basic blog. Just set it up earlier in the day while putting together a couple of things for this presentation, thinking that probably it would make it smoother for us. So if you're thinking about just getting started, where to get started from is at llama.com. We'll just try to maybe visit that. Some of the things I actually did set them up prior to this, basically to save time, given that we do have not so much time, you know. But with Llama, you can be able to specify what download you might want for your operating system. Mine is macOS, so I basically chose that. With macOS, you would basically download the Mac, click the Mac download for macOS button, and go ahead and download a zip, unzip it, and you'll have an Olama app downloaded that you can be able to run. I'll just switch over later on to the other side as we get into the actual technical bit to see what that app actually looks like. How do you get to run it? How do you get to quit in case you want to stop it? For Windows, you'd basically download an executable by choosing the operating system at that page we've just previously seen. With Linux, you would basically just follow the best practice. Maybe updating your package repository and running this command to be able to add Olama to your adding Olama to your adding Olama to your repository on Linux, on your package repository. But then after setting up all that, you now have your app running. How do you verify that it's actually running? You'll have to follow this link. You'll just have to open localhost 11434, basically the port at which Olama runs. If just try to open this in a new tab, since I do have this running already, you can see that showing up right there. And if we do quit Olama, then you can tell. I'll just go ahead and maybe try to quit and try to refresh this. You can see it's not available. But then just like we earlier said, starting it, you'd basically just have this app running just like that. And you can see we now do have it back. We can see it now live. So basically follow through the installation. For macOS, just run the app. Basically, Olama will run. And once it's running, then you may be thinking about, I have Olama running. That means I have this place that this one stop place where I can be able to find a bunch of large language models that I can work with, a bunch of those that I can pull to my local machine, and a bunch of them that I can run on my local machine and be able to do so many things. So just like we talked about earlier, running Gemma locally with Olama. Basically, if you're looking to get started with Gemma, you'd basically you could follow this link. We'll just try to open that in a new tab, and if you go ahead and search, you'll find a bunch of large language models you might want to use. There is Gemma 2, among others. And also, having to have this on your machine, there are a couple of ways that you'll find a couple of ways that you can add these to your machine. And you can also go ahead and specify which exact variant you might want. Do you want the Gemma 2 with 2 billion parameters, trained on 2 billion parameters? Do you want the one with 9 billion, 27 billion, depending on your resources? So what the cap on this could be, not really a cap, but maybe a shortcoming. A shortcoming could be that it might not be the same size. All these, you see, one of them has 2 billion, another 9 billion. That means some of them are bigger than the others, and that means some of them might require a lot more space for you to download them, and some of them might require much more internet and such resources that you might want to factor in at the point of getting any of these to run locally. So I'll just maybe just for the case of us getting to see what that would look like, I did set up some of these prior, but we'll just try to so if you do follow through with one of these commands, it should basically download that model to your machine. And you can see for Gemma, it's about 5.4 GB, and that might take a while. If your internet speed is not as fast, it might take longer. If maybe your resources are a bit of limited, so it might really vary. I'll just pause that so that it does not interrupt the session. All right, so that's where you can find Olama, and that's where you can find the different models. You can browse any of them right over there. You can read about them, and you can also see how many people are pulled either of those models. 1.6 million pulls of Gemma 2. That means people are actually using it. So you might not want to be that one person that's not. All right, moving forward. Yeah, the command that you might want to use for that is that. And once you've successfully pulled these models, what does it look like next for you? That to even before we get 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 to putting it all together in Firebase GenKit, you can be able to try it out and get to understand how it works. Maybe a proof of concept that it actually works. So if maybe we just try to check out, we'll just type Olama right over here. I do hope you can see my screen. I'll just try to maximize this to reduce the okay, so if you just type Olama, you can get to see a couple of commands that are available for you with Olama list. You can be able to see the models that you do have installed. And for example, I do have Gemma 2, the 2 billion parameter model installed, and also the latest version of Gemma. And you can be able to interact with any of these by just typing Olama, run maybe Gemma 2. I'll just specify the exact one. And once you do run that, you can actually be able to interact with such a model. So, okay, yeah, you can get to see that we do have this part where we can now go ahead and type something that we want. I can maybe say what is Firebase, and try to see what Drama 2 thinks about Firebase, and you can see it generating, and that exact feel of you working with generative AI is right over here. You can see that literally still generating, giving us a breakdown, giving us why would you choose Firebase, telling us how Firebase is a comprehensive platform developed by Google that is offered in various tools around building, deploying, scaling, so much more, giving us what Firebase does, backend infrastructure, real-time capabilities, and these are the actual things that Firebase does. Why choose Firebase? Reduce development time. It gives you a lot of batteries installed already. You can plug into things like authentication off the shelf, scalability, cost effectiveness. Ideally, we can agree that this is what Firebase is about. And, basically you can be able to interact with some model in that way, in so many other ways that you might as well want to. But beyond that, we as well might want to set up Firebase GenKit. How do we get to set up Firebase GenKit to basically give us that? To basically give us that framework in which we are going to bundle our application, and where we are going to do all that stuff. So this is a command, but this command is basically an assumption that you do have Firebase CLI installed. If you do not have Firebase CLI installed, we'll attach this URL, and you can be able to install Firebase CLI to basically be able to use the Firebase command. So Firebase Init GenKit will be able to help us get started. Will be able to get us started with the bootstrapping of our GenKit, our Firebase GenKit project. So maybe I'll just go ahead and copy this so that we can actually see how all this comes together, what preferences we might want to have, what preferences we might not want to have at some point. Okay, I'll just go ahead and copy that command, paste it right over here. Since I do have Firebase CLI installed. If you do not, you might want to install Firebase CLI for this Firebase init command to work. So if you do go ahead and execute that command, you can be able to see what I'm seeing on my screen, that you're about to initialize a Firebase project. Do you want to proceed with an existing project? We'll just choose to proceed with an existing one. There are a couple of prompts that you might be given at this point. And okay, so here I'll just go ahead and choose that as the project to consider. And then the next prompt being GenKit setup. GenKit's Firebase integration uses cloud functions for Firebase with TypeScript. Initialize functions to continue. Yes, I do want to initialize functions because that's where we're going to do a couple of setups within there and a couple of configurations. We'll just say yes to that and proceed on with our next prompt. Okay. Here, do you want to use ESLint? Yes, I do want to catch bugs. And for styles, do you want to install dependencies? Now, I'll choose yes to that as well. And okay, so in the background, we're basically having a GenKit project set up for us. And setting up this GenKit project means we are going to have something bootstrapped, something that looks something like this. This is one that I did set up prior to this call, and basically to give us that insight into what it will look like, what we do want to set up, and how that is going to work. So looking at what we do have right over here, as that bootstraps, basically it's going to end up into something like this. We're going to end up with a functions folder because we accepted setup functions, and in there we're going to have a source folder that's going to contain which is going to be more like our runner. And there are a couple of configuration files right below that. Our Firebase configuration files. We do have a README. We do have a library, a lib folder as well. But most of what we are most interested in, and most of where we are going to be working, is right in here. That maybe we could actually just try to explore. Okay, yeah, basically what is going on right in here is that at this point we do get to import a couple of packages. Some of these being the Olama package. Sorry, the importing the GenKit Olama package, and out of that we are pulling out the Olama method. I'm also calling the GenKit AI. It's a scoped package, but basically specifying Firebase, and we still want to access Firebase through that. Then GenKit configure GenKit, and we are basically going to access that at GenKit AI core and generate from GenKit AI. But below that, basically we are basically in the configure GenKit. We are looking at initializing most of these are packages that we've imported. And for Olama, just like we saw earlier, that this URL, the server address, is the address at which Olama runs. And just like we saw, that if you do get to your browser and visit that, it will basically let you know that Olama is running. So what this means is that we do need Olama to run to be able to do all these things that we are looking forward to do. Okay. So beyond that, you will have to specify a model. Primarily, when you set up a GenKit project, it's going to come with Gemma already configured for you. So if you do want to use Gemma 2, you might go ahead and change to that. But you can as well have more than one model right over there. You can have Gemma, you can have Gemma and Gemma 2. This is where you do configure your models. So basically, if you had a different model or anything like that, you would basically want to specify it right over here. We keep our server address the same. This is basically bootstrapped for us, so you don't need to cram it. And we might not want to change a bunch of these. We could leave them in case we want to be able to debug our output, but we actually want to because we are running. We want to actually see what's going on under the hood. But beyond that, we do have flows that could be set up. You can have a flow for whatever functionality you might want. And this is the menu suggestions flow is one of those that you do get to receive by default if you do choose to have it. Via the prompts, there is a section where you prompted and asked if you do want to have a flow set up for you. We'll just check up on this. Okay, our installation is actually moving, and you'll also be at a point prompted to install GenKit CLI globally. Why do you need to install GenKit CLI globally? Because to run our project, just like we do see this right over here, to be able to run it, we shall have to use a GenKit command. So to use GenKit in our command line interface, that means we need GenKit installed. You can choose to scope it, but installing it globally wouldn't hurt as well. So what is one of those other benefits of using GenKit is that you can actually ensure and enforce authorization using Firebase Auth. I mean, Firebase has aced Firebase authentication, and it enables developers build faster without being able to think about so much around authorization, authentication. You get all that out of the box by just plugging into Firebase authentication. So it shouldn't just be limited to you using Firebase authentication elsewhere. What if you wanted to have some authentication before someone gets to maybe interact with something? Well, that is something else that you can want to be able to set up right over here and handle so many things. Check if users have verified emails and so much more. Everything Firebase authentication offers, you might as well want to leverage that in there as well. But then you might also want to set up this other function, and right in here is where you do now get to set up your prompt. You might want to have a prompt that maybe suggests an item for the menu of a subject. Basically, this subject is a placeholder for any user input that will be passed in via the GenKit UI. What the GenKit UI looks like, it's something of this kind, that you basically have a UI in which in which uh, in which in which you can be able to interact with these different models that you've been set up and that you've been able to set up on these different flows. How do you get this running? If you do maybe want to get a detail into that, you can be able to attach a port to it, or you can just go ahead and use GenKit start. It will also be able to run the app. So once your whole setup is done, you can be able to just run this GenKit start and be able to, once you do run GenKit start, opens up your browser with this window. If it hasn't, you can as well just visit localhost 4000 run, and at that you can be able to get this interface, and at this GenKit UI you can be able to toggle models. If you had more than one model, you can have them listed right over here. If you do have a couple flows, you can have a flow for menu suggestions, language translation, and any other you might want as well. You could even have a flow for, if given that we're looking at language translation, we can have a flow for particular languages, and we can take it as far. GenKit doesn't limit us at that. But beyond that, you might want to construct your prompt, be able to interact with your model at this point through the generate method, and some of the parameters that we do get to pass in there are the model. We need to specify the model that we are working with. If it was Gemma 2 or Gemma, you basically have to specify it right over here. So maybe one thing to note is that if I do get to specify Gemma 2 right over here, that's what I probably want to use. So if I've specified Gemma 2, right over here, I'll basically also want to pull up Gemma 2. So whatever model you try to pull up here, it might be essential for you to initialize it with Olama at this point. And why are we calling Olama all through this? Because we want to use a model hosted locally. And we've already looked at how Olama gets together, how we can actually get to have these models working in, how we can actually test the AI generation, that Gen AI with Olama and everything beyond that. And oh, okay, this is just another, this is the language translator flow. Okay, so looking at these, basically you might also want to specify a temperature. The temperature might inform your model on how best it should perform and so much more. Then we pull our prompt basically from that constant, pass it right over there. You can actually have more configurations to this, but we can just leave it at the temperature for now. And yeah, the return value will be just the text from the LLM. And where does that happen? It basically happens right in here. And okay, so if you might notice that there is this flow, there is another flow here. You can have another flow below that, and you can take it as far as you might want. So what this looks like is that GenKit gives you flexibility. It gives you that flexibility of being able to that flexibility of being able to add as many flows as you might want and work with them. Also, the other thing is that out of the box, GenKit works with Zod. For validation. Imagine you want to perform some validation that maybe a certain text should be a string, and if the user is not passing texts as strings, you want to maybe reject something like that. Well, we can as well achieve that so that we do pass input that is validated. So you can do that through an input schema. Then we can also have an output schema that basically is going to inform what is returned by the LLM. And yeah, right over here we can as well just have a function that's basically going to prompt some model, just like we saw earlier via the tests, and that one that does come. So basically, if we are now thinking about translation and we are leveraging a model that's heavy on language, that means we don't need to do so much. We can basically just pass a prompt and specify the language we want to specify to. The language you want to translate to. For example, translate this text to Spanish and auto detect the language, and so much. Yeah, you can actually, you're not limited to that kind of prompt. You can take the prompt as far as you might want. Then you might as well want to specify the model that you're working with, Olama 2, and have it right over there. And as well, you go ahead and return a response. So that is, can I say that's a walkthrough through what it would look like setting up all this and what our project would be like, once you do run the command that we did run right over here. Yeah, you can actually choose a model provider. In the other side, we just took a step forward and were able to set up this. But if you're maybe looking at following through these, we'll actually be able to share this write-up as well on that. It's basically explicitly, writing out what it would take to set up what we've just walked through right now. And yeah, I guess we're hitting the top of the hour, and I would want to check in and see if there are any questions. Eugene or Sabrina, are you able to hear me? Hello? Oh, sorry, I can't hear you. I don't know if you're able to hear me. All right. Thank you. And yeah, that brings us to Eugene. I don't know if you're able to hear me, but I can't hear you. All right. I don't know if we do have any questions.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can now hear you.
Sorry about that. So I had a question about something you mentioned before in regards to Olama. So does it like provide support for domain-specific translation models or contextual language understanding?
Well, it's not Olama that's providing. Maybe I would love to just understand your question a little bit. What you're asking about is if Olama provides. Actually, could
Support
you
for
please just
domain-specific translation.
our domain-specific
Like does it?
translation?
Yeah,
Okay, in that, do you mean particular languages? What do you mean by domain-specific?
yeah, like contextual language understanding or specific translation models. As I'm not really sure to put it across. It's just from something that I had you mention before, like how it complements the Firebase GenKit and Gem and Gemma.
Yeah. So what I
So
would say, yes.
no, like I
Yeah.
was
What?
asking, is it responsible for the language model training or the specific translation tasks?
Oh, okay. So in this case, what Olama, the role that Olama is playing is that it is the repository where we are picking up all these models and where we are basically being able to pull them up from and be able to run them. But then the models that we're actually leveraging for most of the language translation are German models. Yeah. So basically, your question around domain specific, or I would say maybe generic. There's actually, can I say, there's a cap on the languages that are supported at the moment. I will maybe be able to share resources on that, but it's not like every other language is supported at the moment. It's basically a couple of those that are scoped out and enabled at the moment.
Okay, and also you had mentioned that do we have millions of languages? So for the multiple languages, does Jenkit manage translations for the multiple languages at once, or how exactly is the the translated data stored and updated?
Oh, okay. So basically, if you're looking at translating and you're looking at, if there actually is so many flexible ways that you can go about that. If you maybe want to translate to multiple languages, or if you're looking at building an application that is going to work with a couple of other languages, just like you said, just like you said, just like you said, and just like we saw earlier, GenKit gives you that flexibility to add a couple of flows. So you can have a flow for maybe language X, language Y, and adjust the prompts. But you might not want to do that since there are so many languages, and you want to make this a lot more flexible. So what you can actually do at that is you can translate via the prompt. Yeah, that you can provide a prompt and go ahead and be more explicit, be really explicit about what language you want to translate to. For example, I could pass a prompt something like translate "How are you" in Swahili, or rather than just saying "How are you," because the setup we've seen was basically coupled to a given language. Yeah, that whatever user prompts are passed through, those user prompts are translated to that given language. So that basically means that it's not as flexible with that. So for more flexibility, you might want to pass in user prompts that are specific to the language that you want whatever user input to be translated to. Yeah, but we did mention about 7,000, over 7,000 languages spoken. Not all those languages are yet supported. A bunch of them are supported, but still there's that there's that room. And as we discussed earlier about the future of of AI translation and things around that, there is so much room, and it's the future looks really interesting and bright about what other languages can still be added. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that as well. I can't see if we have any other questions on the chat. So I guess mine would just be to thank our audience for listening to both sessions and also contributing on the chat, as well as to you, Hassan, for the insightful talk that you've given us today. I'm still trying to comprehend a lot of the things you said a few minutes ago, but it was really insightful. Thank you for that. And I hope to see everyone else for tomorrow's session. And I think we'll continue this conversation with you a bit on later on.
Yeah, surely. See you in Nairobi actually at Devfest.
Thank you as well. Have a good evening. Cheers.
All right, you too. Bye.